I'm Crystal Diff, Program Coordinator.
And I'm Bill McDonald, Adult Services Librarian.
And we're here today to do a presentation on Stars of Charlotte County, where we're going to talk about a few people that have gone through and lived in Charlotte County and have become famous in a certain subject. So today we're kind of focusing on sports and music.
Sports and music, exactly.
Yeah. So I'll start off.
Okay.
And I am going to be talking about Chuck Taylor. Now, Chuck Taylor, some of you may have some Chucks on right now, so look down at your feet if you have some Converse All-Stars. Chuck Taylor's is what they started to be called, eventually just being brought down to the name Chucks. So this man who really kind of helped invent this shoe that is so popular, everybody has seen them or has owned a pair in some point in their lifetime. He retired here in Port Charlotte, and he actually lived right off of Beacon Drive in Port Charlotte. When he retired, just like many other people who retired here, he wanted to have some nice warm weather. He looked all over Florida and just really fell in love with Port Charlotte. And he ended up also, he was very interested in golf, so he wanted to live right off of the Port Charlotte Golf Club, and he lived right off of the first hole. So he had a very nice retirement. He got here in 1963. And really, when he was here, a lot of people say he was very humble. But he was just such a big icon in our area. And because he was so humble, I don't think that a lot of people knew that he actually was here and actually lived here.
Wow.
And I think it's really amazing that he did live here and call this his home, because during his lifetime, he was always traveling. He was always on the road because that was his job. So he started off playing basketball in high school, and he was pretty good at it. So he started playing in some state teams and ended up being on some pro teams as well. And basketball was a very new sport at this time. It was only invented in 1891. So we're talking about, he was born in 1901. So it was only 10 years old when he was born. So this was a brand new sport to the entire world. So he was really good at it. But during the summer months, because basketball wasn't as popular, he needed to find another job. So he ended up in Chicago, and he went into Converse. And Converse at that time was making basketball shoes. That was their thing. They made athletic basketball shoes. So as a basketball star, he knew about Converse. They were looking for a spokesman to help sell their shoes. So he did get hired for that. And so he started traveling around and doing some basketball clinics, teaching kids, high school kids, college kids, different tips and tricks on how to play the game, and kind of using his star status to help sell these shoes. Within about a year of him doing that, he made some recommendations to Converse, and they actually remade the shoe and added in his recommendations. And because of his star status also, they just were flying off the shelves. He was selling them wherever he went. He just had a car full of Converse All-Stars, which is what they were called then. And he was just very, very good at selling these shoes. The Converse also created their own basketball team called the All-Stars. Really, the basketball team came after the shoe as a marketing ploy to help get these shoes sold. So you would think it was the other way around, but it actually happened that way. And so Chuck Taylor became the player manager of this team from 1926 to 27. Because again, he was just so good at selling these shoes to everybody, and everybody loved him. He was very good at, teaching, and he just was all over the United States. He was constantly traveling to a new town. But eventually, because he was such a good salesman, he moved away from playing basketball and really just kind of became this spokesman star of Converse All-Stars. Or they became known as Chuck Taylor, so they actually put his name on their shoe in 1923. So he was only working there for 2 years before they put his name on the shoe. And this is the first celebrity athlete shoe. Nobody had ever done this before. It was brand new. And it was the official basketball shoe of the U.S. Olympic team from 1936 to 1968. The official athletic shoes of the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II, which Chuck Taylor actually, he couldn't fully enlist, he couldn't get deployed out during World War II, but he did actually help to recruit, and he ran their physical fitness programs and captained their basketball team. So it's he still was really helpful during World War II. He ended up in the 50s, he finally tried to settle down. He ended up marrying Ruth Adler, who was a Hollywood star actress. So he moved out to Los Angeles. That marriage didn't work out. After a few years, he kind of just set back out on the road again, and he married Lucille Kimbrell, or Lucy. And she was also involved with Hollywood. She taught actors like Ronald Reagan, who, yes, he was also a president, but he was an actor. And also Vincent Price were some of the people that she worked with. So pretty high end.
Pretty high end.
And so this is getting into the 60s now, and because of his determination and his knowledge, 90% of college and pro basketball players were wearing Chucks in the 60s. So that is a lot. And about 80% of people who wore sneakers owned a pair of Chucks. So then there were star players like Wilt Chamberlain, who was wearing them, and Julius Erving, who swore by them, and they helped to promote the brand even further. They also were not very expensive, so that helped out also. And then actors and musicians started to wear them, so instead of them being just an athletic shoe that helped you play basketball better, they became kind of a icon for style and fashion. And people like Elvis, James Dean, Michael J. Fox, and Back to the Future, Leonardo DiCaprio, Sylvester Stallone in Rocky, when he's running up the stairs, he's wearing Chucks. Kurt Cobain, David Bowie, Ice Cube, the Ramones, the Beatles. So everybody who was famous or popular was wearing these shoes, and it kind of turned from that athletic shoe to kind of a punk grunge fashion type of thing. And so I know I grew up in the 90s and everybody was wearing Chucks. I had no idea at that time that he lived here, but everybody was wearing those shoes. And at first they only came out in white, then they started making them in black, and now you can find them in any color, any design. Now the company is owned by Nike, but they did survive for a very, very long period of time for this company with basically only one type of athletic shoe. They really made a place for themselves in history, and because of Chuck Taylor, Converse is famous. So it's really neat to kind of see the play on both of them, where they kind of both helped each other out with becoming a well-known household name. And so he retired here in '63, kind of retired. He still kind of went out to, if people asked him to come out to do a showing or, just kind of show up to certain events. And he actually was brought into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in April 1969. And James Naismith is the man who invented basketball. But when he was inducted into this Hall of Fame, nobody knew James Naismith's name, but they knew Chuck Taylor. So he really was just an icon for basketball as well, not just for these shoes. And so he lived here for about 6 years, and of course in the 60s that was the prime of Port Charlotte.
Right.
It was started in the 50s. We've talked about this a few times in multiple programs we've done. So in the 60s was really the prime of new development and retirement into Port Charlotte. And I think it was listed as #1 in the state or the nation to retire to. So it was pretty well known at that point in time. But unfortunately, in April 1969 is when he was inducted, but by June 1969, he ended up passing away. Actually, just 1 day short of his 68th birthday.
Wow.
And it was very sudden. And he is actually, his remains are in Restlawn Memorial Gardens, which is right here on Forest Nelson near Mid-County Regional Library, where we are now. So in 2019, just to give you an idea of how many people owned this pair of shoe, it was 800 million Chucks that were sold from the beginning of the company in around 1918 to 2019. 800 million pairs of shoes were sold, All-Stars. And in 2015, 270,000 pairs of these were sold every single day.
Wow.
So very popular shoe, very popular man. And he graced Port Charlotte in Charlotte County. And in August, I will be dedicating a sign to him with the Telling Your Story, History in the Parks over at Herald Avenue Park. So he will have a sign dedicated to him over there and his basketball legacy.
These were the Air Jordans before Air Jordans.
Yes, very much so.
You look at basketball players with Magic Johnson or Wilt Chamberlain or Dr. J, and they all kind of got that from him in a way. The merchandising, the whole being connected with the product, but the product being connected with the person.
Yes, he was the original athlete to do that. So it's really neat.
I remember the black Chucks that everyone wore.
Yes.
I mean, you could just, and they did go well with blue jeans, or so they could be serious athletic shoes, or they could be like cool, fashion shoes, for men and women. And women started wearing them in the 90s, I think it was.
I think it's 80s, 90s, that punk grunge scene that was coming out.
Exactly.
Yeah. So really neat history.
Yeah. Well, Crystal mentioned that Chuck retiring to Port Charlotte. I have someone, Chris Demakes, who is the guitarist and singer of a well-known band called Less Than Jake. And he went to school here, high school, and he was born actually in Michigan. The family moved to Port Charlotte when Chris was young, and he played Little League here. He was actually, we talk about athletics. Chris was pretty athletic in his own right. He was the varsity pitcher for Port Charlotte High, which you went to, and he was a decent student as well. He was one of these guys that didn't have to study much. We all love those individuals, right? Just never have to crack a book and getting good grades. And he befriended another guy from Port Charlotte who joined the band, Vinnie Fiorello. Vinnie is a drummer, and Chris is a guitarist and singer. And they started bands in high school when he wasn't pitching and studying, although he didn't study that much, he didn't have to. And one of their first bands that Vinnie and Chris formed was Good Grief, which I thought was a great name for a band. Now, talking about names, Less Than Jake has a real interesting story behind the name of their band. They would practice in Vinnie's house in one of the spare rooms, and evidently the vibrations of the bass guitar bothered their English bulldog Jake. So Vinnie's mother would say, "It's great that you kids are practicing and I support your band, but you're really bothering Jake." So they were Less Than Jake, and it was tongue in cheek. It wasn't saying that he was neglected as a child, but they were just having some fun with the fact that the practice sessions were bothering the dog. In fact, they even said that their earlier songs were at a very fast tempo because they had to practice quickly before the dog got upset. Yeah. So anyway, they Chris's senior year, he gets accepted at University of Florida, Gainesville, and College Town is great for forming bands, and you look at Athens, Georgia, REM and the B-52s came out of there. Talking Heads come out of the Rhode Island School of Design. I don't know what college town it is, but it is a college town. And then also Gainesville had Tom Petty. His band Mudcrutch later became Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers when they moved out to California. So they're the college town, meeting people from different backgrounds, all different tastes in music and art, and then you also have that time where you're not supervised by your parents, so you can stay up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. There's no adults saying, you've got school in the morning.
There's no dogs.
There's no dogs too.
To bother.
So the idea of the college town and the environment, the eclectic environment, was just a great incubator for creativity. And of course, Chris, sensing this, he invites Vinnie up. So Vinnie starts working with Chris and the band up in Gainesville. And they start playing house parties, which is a big thing in college campuses, and also the local bars. And now at that time, this is the late 80s, early 90s. Now the internet hasn't really come into an existence, at least for most individuals. And so everything is DIY, do it yourself, which also comes out of punk music, where you're making your own flyers, you're posting your own flyers, you're booking your own gigs.
Making your own clothes.
Making your own clothes, recording your own cassette tapes of the concerts. And so they would do all those things, and they would hand out cassette tapes to every record store they could find in Florida and Georgia. And they said, okay, sell these tapes for $3 or $4. This is to the record store. We don't want any of the money. We just want our name to get out. And they were very much that DIY ethic. And of course, punk, their type of music, Less Than Jake, is a mixture of punk and ska. And ska music is like reggae, only it's fast. It's a very upbeat reggae type music. They both came out of Jamaica. Ska has more horns. They have trombone and trumpet in it, at least in the classic ska pairing of instruments. And so also at this time, the late 80s, early 90s, you had grunge, you also had punk and ska bands, and they all would play the same bill. So there are a lot of cross influences between ska and punk. So Less Than Jake finds themselves in Gainesville, soaking up both punk and ska. So that would be kind of their musical influences, and that would be the style of music they did. They also started noticing that their fans, the small fans, would write them letters, and they would write letters back, and they would pay for their own postage, and they would have additional jobs, delivering pizzas or working in a coffee shop or something, and all that money went into any extra money that they had that didn't cover living expenses, went into promoting the band. They lived very cheaply, very sparsely. And they also decided other ways to market themselves. Chris, having an excellent sense of humor, would dress up as certain characters before the concert and also during the concert. So he would dress up as a football coach, or a Wall Street type, or a college professor, or even as Bob Barker in The Price is Right. And people would say, oh, that band that played ska and punk, and the guy that was dressed up like the football coach or Bob Barker, yeah, I know those guys, they're Less Than Jake. Here's their tape. So they knew that would be a clever way of promoting themselves, getting in people's long-term memory to remember the band. So years go by and they keep plugging away. They're going to playing different concerts, and they're going to out of the way places, trying to get the name out. Lo and behold, a person from a major record label comes across their tape that they had distributed to one of the many record stores that over the years that they had sent, and says, I got to meet these guys. He tracks them down and signs them to a major record label. He had a chance to tour with Bon Jovi, and some of the groups that were popular in the early 90s didn't want to have anything to do with Bon Jovi because he was linked as a hair band from the 80s. Yeah. Less Than Jake's attitude was, well, we already have a fan base, we can increase it more by getting Bon Jovi's people to like us. Smart. And they all have younger brothers and sisters, and they'll already can bring them along as well. So they toured with Bon Jovi. They also toured with a band that was popular at the time called Good Charlotte. And their first album came out called Pezcore. And they named it Pezcore because Vinnie was a big fan of Pez candy dispensers. So he thought that would be a neat name for an album. Come about 2003, they released about their fourth or fifth album called Anthem. Now, Anthem ends up being in the top 40 of the Billboard 200 and contains the hit, and I love this title, The Science of Selling Yourself Short. You know, they have very clever titles, and they also did a video called She's Going to Break Soon with Alexis Bledel. She was on Gilmore Girls. I think she played Rory. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
She's in the video, and so they got a lot of sales, a lot of press, and they became very well known. And they have a lot of great tunes with a lot of funny titles. One of their songs is called Jen Doesn't Like Me Anymore. And it's based on, Vinnie noticed that there was this one young woman that had a crush on Chris, and but she ends up hating Chris. And so they thought they'd write a song about it, how, you know, Jen doesn't come to their concerts anymore, and Jen's upset that it doesn't bother Chris that she doesn't like him anymore. Yep. You know, just the whole kind of absurdist way of writing a song of something on that topic. And their songs are real high energy, and they do mix that ska and punk, and they have a real crazy sense of humor, and they take their music seriously but not themselves. And they're doing a lot of other different things. They're kind of getting back together and releasing some things. I heard that that Vinnie is not in the band as much anymore. So, but they're involved in a lot of different projects, and I think that involvement, whether it's podcasts or merchandising, comes from their beginnings where they didn't have the backing of, and they didn't have any money. They had to do everything themselves. So they were able to launch on to do different ideas and new projects. And to think that these guys came from Port Charlotte High, you know, and that they had band practices here, and you know, they became famous.
And of course, I was in high school when they really got famous, and you know, I was one of those punk kind of kids. So and my friends got me into Less Than Jake, and you know, I had friends that were just obsessed with Less Than Jake. And of course, because we knew that they were from Port Charlotte, it was just even better. Like, how awesome is this? They're from Port Charlotte. Like, you know, something cool happened here.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because, you know, as a teenager, you're just like, whatever, this is, this is Port Charlotte. But, and they would actually, when they would come home, like to visit their parents or whatever they were doing to visit here, they would actually play some shows and like the rinkiest, rinky-dink little bars and stuff. And, you know, I'd hear from my friends like, oh, you know, Less Than Jake's coming, but you wouldn't know. It wasn't like an announced, like, oh, this is a month in advance show. It's like, oh, they're gonna be there tomorrow. Like,
or you heard that day or that afternoon.
Yeah, like, hey, Less Than Jake's gonna be here. Like, or you just happened to be out and they showed up. It wasn't really announced, but you know, they lived here. So to them, I'm sure it wasn't too big of a deal. They weren't gonna announce it and make this big deal about it. But when they were here, even when they were vacationing or visiting, they played a show. So I kind of see it along the lines of what they were doing all along. They're constantly putting their name out there wherever and whenever they can. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
it was pretty awesome. I'm sure they wear some Chucks.
Yes. Exactly. Got to tie it in. Yeah.
Yeah, tie it all together. And they played shows, I'm sure, like Warped Tour and things like that, which all of us teenagers were at during that time. So
Absolutely. In
Great.
fact, they said, "Do you want to go out to the boonies here? It's a very sketchy area." I said, "We're there. If it's sketchy, this is our kind of place." So they never turned anything down. They never thought they were too good or too cool or too hip. They just realized any place can work, and that attitude, anything can work, and
that's where the teenagers were. I mean,
exactly.
When you're a teenager, think about it. You don't have that much money. You're not going. Yeah, you can get to some concerts if you have a job or if your parents buy you tickets or something. But for the most part, you're not going to concerts that much as a teenager.
Yeah.
You are going to the cheaper, lower end kind of places because that's what you can get into. And that's what's in your hometown.
Exactly.
So, pretty neat.
Yeah. And it's taken, I think, in some ways, the Centennial to recognize all the great people.
Yeah.
Chuck and Vinnie and Chris and all the great historical things and all the great current things that are happening here and has happened here.
The connections between them, like Chuck's.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes they're connected. You don't think that they are, but yeah, I think the Centennial this year is really helping everybody to bring that together. And I'm always looking at, not just history, but, different subjects like sports and things like that. But I think everybody, no matter what kind of subject that you work for or you're interested in, there's something historically significant to you during that time or, during this past 100 years.
Absolutely,
so it really is bringing a lot of this to light.
Absolutely.
So, yes, we are having the Charlotte County Centennial this year. This program is one of those programs kind of designated to some Charlotte County history. So be sure to check out all of our other programs and videos on the Charlotte County Community Services page on YouTube, and check out the local library's program calendar to see what's going on in your area. The end.
Bye.